This is the quest for El Dorado, and this is the expansion, which we'll get to in a bit. El Dorado, short for Elevated Dorado, is a straightforward game about expeditions doing their best to go either straight or forward as they struggle towards the mythical city of gold. So let's start with the fact that everything about getting this game to the table is so easygoing. It's easy to teach, easy to get excited by, it's easy to fit into your life, since you can always set up a course that makes the game tougher or quicker and easier. If you see your uncle screwing up his face during the rules explanation like a paper bag, then you can just chop the caves out of the game, making it simpler, and it's still great. This game's great with 4 players, good with 3, and thanks to some rule changes, it's great if there's just 2 of you. But once your friends start playing El Dorado, you'll be plunging them into a juicy jungle of sweaty decisions. That line's a little raunchy, but we're going to stick with it. So El Dorado is what's known as a deck building game, all right? Every player is going to start with a deck representing their expedition. An unfocused gaggle of explorers, travelers, and a single sailor who's almost certainly lost. Now, on your turn, you're going to draw a hand from your deck and play cards from that hand to whack your way forward. Machete icons will carry you into a jungle, coins will pay your way through villages, and oars will send you splashing into rivers. And once you know that, you're going to stop seeing this plain-looking map, and instead, you'll see a worrisome obstacle course full of different paths and deadly pitfalls. You see, when you choose where to end your movement for that turn, you're kind of gambling on what your next hand will look like. And if you gamble wrong, you're not going to be able to move at all. And maybe that's not a bad thing. At the end of your turn, any coin cards you didn't spend moving can instead be spent at the shop. Perhaps bringing in a useful jack-of-all-trades. A cartographer who, when you draw him, drags 2 more cards into your hand. Or even photographers who'll bring in yet more money, eventually letting your expedition pay for just absurd things like a plane or talking to someone who actually lives here. Lots to choose from, but don't worry. In fact, when players go shopping, they can only buy these 6 cards that are in the shop. And only once one of those stacks has been bought by everybody does the next player who goes shopping get the opportunity to buy anything they want. But what they choose then enters the shop. And this is an exquisite bit of balancing because it keeps El Dorado fast and accessible because everyone's got a limited, tamped down selection of options. And yet, for experienced players, it means they don't just build the same kind of deck every time because they have to adapt at what is available. Incidentally, if you've never played a deck building game before, you're in for a treat. The question of what your deck needs and the responsibility involved, followed by your own mistakes hitting you in the face for the rest of the game as you draw a card that wasn't quite right over and over, it's satisfying and rewarding and just so much fun watching this thing grow. If El Dorado had just been these 2 halves, travel and shopping, I would have been down with that. I mean, that's the foundation of most package holidays. But where this starts becoming a great game is the way these 2 halves of the game each start trying to seduce you. So cards without coins, if you don't spend them for movement, can actually be spent as a kind of loose change. That's half a coin each. So let's say on your turn you draw this hand and want to do some travel and some shopping. Well, you could do that, or you could not move and then save the money and buy an even better card for the rest of the game. That actually makes a kind of sense. So you do that and then, oh God, your friends are running away, leaving you behind. What were you thinking? This is a race. Even better is that players have the option of taking detours to camps on the board that permanently remove one of the cards in your hand from the game, making your deck leaner, meaner, more focused. Ooh, Steve. Oh, sweet old Steve. The sweet Steve machine. Listen, some people in the camp, definitely not me, have been talking about how you're slowing us down. So, I know it's awful, but maybe you could just stay here at camp for some time. And most ridiculously of all, this race course is run through with caves like Swiss cheese. And if you go near one, you'll get an unknown reward. Are you really going to divert from your racing line for that? Can you really resist the siren song of random chance. I might not be rubbish. In addition, though, to making the deck building just better, the racing in Eldorado actually fixes a problem that's kind of dogged the genre of deck builders since they first arrived, which is, when I'm watching you take your turn in a deck builder, your turns are kind of boring to me because you're tinkering with something that I don't fully understand. In Eldorado, though, your friends' turns are fascinating, not just because they're fast, not just because they're racing you, but because of one very excellent, very stupid rule that means all the turns in Eldorado are extremely interactive, which is that players cannot move through each other. Being stuck behind a player is almost always going to block the easiest path forward, but sometimes it's going to block all your paths forward. You are stuck, and in a slower game, that mechanic would be infuriating. But in the peppy game of Eldorado, it's just funny. Not least because players who are in the lead probably have the worst decks, which means there's this sensation of Formula One cars trying to overtake a van. Maybe the best way to summarize why Eldorado is so good is the mystery that sort of permeates the whole game. The opaque nature of deck building means everyone is sort of excited as to what's going to happen next. You can be in last place and still have a good feeling that you can win this because your deck might take off late and rocket you to the front. And then imagine what it's like being in first place where, yes, you're winning and that's exciting, but you're also living in fear of your friends catching up to you. Very quickly your deck will become full of so many cards that you have no idea what you're going to draw, what it's going to mean for you. Let me be crystal clear. It's possible to have turns in Eldorado where you travel a lot, or turns where you buy a lot. But it's also possible to just have good turns and bad turns. Dreadful turns. Turns that have the whole table laughing at you. Or turns that have the whole table going, what? As you somehow cross an entire fifth of the board in 10 seconds. In conclusion, Eldorado is just superb. It is simple, it's stirring, it's surprisingly cheap, and it's Moorish because you're always playing with a different map and the shop ends up being a bit different. Also, as an added bonus, it's easier to get people to play than Trains, which is my actual favourite deck building game, but it looks like a parody of modern board games, so no one wants to play it with me. And that's fine. On the off chance that you have never bought a modern designer board game before and you're looking for an affordable first step into the hobby, my goodness, I would say buy Pandemic. But then if you kept looking at me, I would say something like, you know, or you could buy like Carcassonne or maybe Eldorado. It's that good. It's like third down if you push me. Oh, and like Pandemic and Carcassonne, if you want to sex things up a bit, you can spend a little extra money on an expansion, which is Spanish for expansion. I admire the base game of Eldorado for being such a balanced, clean design, but I also admire the Heroes and Hexes expansion for being willing to dirty things up a bit. At the top of the billing are new map tiles with these hexed hexagons. Empurpled spaces that you can travel into not by paying a card, but by drawing a non-specific South American curse. Perhaps you'll enter a curse space and, oh no, you have to put a useless curse card in your deck, like a wasting disease that's afflicting your expedition. Or maybe, oh no, you're struck with paralysis, and every other player on the board gets to move forward one space. I love the idea of these cursed hexagons. I love that they've peppered the board with these wild spaces that players can then define themselves by either flinging themselves headlong into or shrewdly avoiding. But what's really disappointing is that about half of these cursed tokens that you might draw are some variant on miss a bit of your go. You flip a tile, you see some hieroglyphs that you then need to look up in the manual and you read, oh yeah, okay, the next time you play this card it doesn't happen, lending your future turns a bit of a stuttering quality. Overall, I love the idea of this expansion module, but in play, I don't actually think it lives up to its potential. The expansion also adds special hero cards, by far the most powerful cards in the game, and they join you for free. if you take a detour to the new hero camp. And you're willing to put up with some truly middling parodies. My friends had a lot of time for Christopher Dundee and Gertrude Everdeen, less so for the riffs on Guybrush Threepwood, Nathan Drake, and Magellan. Mechanically, I love these heroes. I love that everyone gets something unique that differentiates their deck and special power you can try and build your deck around. Thematically, I think they're kind of a misstep. I mean, maybe you can agree with me that whatever you're doing with the theme of your game, everything, mechanics, art assets, illustration, writing, should be pulling in the same direction. Having a completely straight-faced game with this one corner stuffed full of goofiness kind of rubs me the wrong way. I don't know. I might be being fussy. Let's move on. Now, before the game's even begun, everyone's dealt their own little mascot with their own little name, and that's just a really nice bit of colour, but also you can, whenever your animal is drawn, overwork them for a one-time bonus that triples the power of that animal, but then they are gone from your deck because they're dead or they're off to phone their union or something. And this I love because it does fit with the theme. I think it's great that it adds so much colour and flavour without players having to learn many more rules. I think these stupid animals are the height of elegance. Hear that, Ripley? Finally, you get 4 new kinds of cards that you can buy from the shop, broadening everyone's options, but not too much, and adding just a little more variety. There's also the geologist who lets you move on to the previously impassable mountain spaces, which is so exciting, but sounds really boring, so I think I have to gloss over it. No, I'm not going to gloss over it. Listen, look, sometimes there are mountains, and often they can define the hex they're on, because you get these winding, snaky paths. The idea of putting someone in your deck who can get you over those by bypassing some of the course. But then, of course, you've still got the geologists. You have to buy them ahead of time. Are they even going to show up in time? Are you picking up what I'm putting down? It's interesting. So, we recommend the original game. Do we recommend the expansion? I don't know. Listen, this is a box of bells and whistles that is going to delight people who love the original game. It delighted me and my friends. But I didn't have to buy it. You see, this box actually has quite a high price tag, but it does not have a high quantity or an exceptionally high quality of ideas. And actually, that doesn't... Oh God, I knocked it far away. Actually, that doesn't surprise me because this expansion is numbered. This is expansion number 1. And whenever I see that, I always hear, yeah, there's not much in this box, but don't worry because we will be giving you the chance to buy another expansion. It's a German board game. I'm not just racist. So anyway, if you want this, I think you can buy it. I think you'll have fun with it. But if money is in any way tight for you, I think that rather than buying this expansion, just keep your money and put it towards a brand new game. And since this has been kind of a short review, do you want to humour me and just take a look at one more racing board game? Do you want to look at the racing board game that got me into this hobby? Do you want to see the board game that, in a way, caused me to start Shut Up and Sit Down? Say hello to Robo Rally. This game was put out in 1994 by Richard Garfield and Wizards of the Coast between 2 little releases called Magic the Gathering and Netrunner. This is a beloved riot of a race game about robots rushing across a factory floor that received no less than 5 expansions in its day. Each round, players simultaneously program 5 actions from a deeply inadequate hand of 9 cards, and then you execute what happens, with robots inevitably knocking one another off course, and players just making mistakes, causing robots to get on the wrong conveyor belt, or get seared by a flamethrower, or just sprint excitedly into a bin. This is a first-rate puzzle, but it is also frequently side-splittingly funny. I mean, the robots are funny, like when they get turned around due to a mistake in the programming and then end up rushing away from the finish line as fast as possible. But also, it's funny to watch your friends on some of the more difficult boards, as the manual even refers to this thing called, I think, a robot dance, where players, you can watch your friends turning left and right as they try and visualize where their robot will be after they move to rotate, move left. And because this is mad genius Richard Garfield we're talking about, and because this was the 90s, there's all kinds of crazy nonsense in the deck of option cards, equipment that you can stick on your robot with these mad 3D renders if you go for a pit stop. There's a missile that flies around the board that you have to program in addition to your robot. There's teleporters and bridges that you put on the board, but then anyone can use. I adore this game. I spent so much of my childhood playing it, but it's not something we often talk about on Shut Up and Sit Down, because it's not that you can't buy it anymore, it's worse than that. The Robo Rally license was passed to Avalon Hill in 2005, and the editions they've put out since then have been bad. They're ugly and flimsy, but also just much less ambitious. I don't want to exaggerate what this state of affairs is like for me, but imagine if you loved someone and they moved out of your house and then moved in with a vampire who continues to this day to suck the life out of them, but it's okay because you still have your loved one's discarded carapace and you can hold it close to yourself and remember what they used to smell like. Oh, lead. In all seriousness, what's interesting and extra annoying about the Avalon Hill version is they released their noxious edition in 2005, but then tried to reboot it in 2016 by bringing in Richard Garfield, who made all kinds of modernizing tweaks to his original 90s design. But then they still released this rebooted 2016 version with the same loveless aesthetics that they did before. No one seems to have bought or seems to want this new edition of Robo Rally. But second, when you look at all of the expansion boxes that were released for the 1994 edition of the Wizards of the Coast Robo Rally, all of them added more components, more complexity, more color, more stupidity, more flavor. Which is to say, that's what the fans wanted, and yet those are all of the things that Avalon Hill crowbarred out of Robo Rally for their new edition. It is, as you'd imagine, quite difficult for me to unpick the cask strength nostalgia that I feel for Robo Rally with how good of a game it actually is. But I will say that I would love the opportunity to revisit this. I would love if someone could release a new edition of Robo Rally that captures some of the magic that the original edition had when it was an award-winning game. Maybe, who knows? Maybe I'll get that opportunity in the future. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. We have other videos. I don't usually ramble about nonsense from my childhood at the end of them. Look, there's proof. You can watch these. They don't have me talking about my childhood in them. That's guaranteed. It's stamp it, seal of approval. No childhood.